First up, Tina Brown went from editing Tatler to later The New Yorker and Newsweek. In between, she spent some celebrated years at Vanity Fair, growing its audience from around 200,000 to a mere 1.2 million. She made waves in '85 with the magazine's cover featuring Ronald and Nancy Reagan, photographed by Harry Benson, and a rare private look inside their lives. Just a few months later, she lifted the veil on the monarchy with her story on Princess Diana's tumultuous marriage to Prince Charles. And in '91, her cover featured a naked 7 months pregnant Demi Moore, photographed by the great Annie Leibovitz, stirred up quite a controversy. Who knew a mere 17 years later we'd be debating the U.S. president's expletives on a nearly daily basis? But whoever declared the pen was mightier than the sword was clearly talking about Tina. She's described Jackie Kennedy Onassis as crazed and having an enormous head and a fragile presence, Philip Roth as being like an accountant, and Boris Johnson is simply odious. Luckily for us, she also happened to keep a diary daily throughout her entire 8 years at Vanity Fair, all laid out in her terrific new book. Tina Brown joins me now. Great to see you, Tina.
Thank you so much.
You know, I've repeatedly quoted Quentin Tarantino's "I knew enough to do more than I did," his quote about Harvey Weinstein, but I want to take the quote and take you in a different direction. Did you know enough to do more than you did to warn us about Donald Trump? You knew him really well.
I did. I mean, he was the 80s, right? Which is when Vanity Fair was making its mark. Well, I actually liked his voice enormously at first. I extracted his famous book, The Art of the Deal.
I know that.
And as in the diaries I say about him, this book is BS, right? But it's authentic BS, which is... And I said,
an entertaining con man, and I suspect the American public would like nothing better,
absolutely.
You said at the time.
That's right, because I thought the voice was, was authentic. And when I met him first, I thought he was a hoot, frankly. And I mean, he was brash, he was funny, he was loud. And then gradually, as the years went by, I found him very much less amusing because we began to kind of cover his finances and realized that there was a lot of, there was much less there than met the eye.
Was the turning point, was it the Marie Brenner column about some of his financial dealings? Was that the column in which it was mentioned that he kept a book of Hitler's speeches? That was in your magazine,
That's
yes?
right, yes. And in the diaries, I describe how we published this piece, which I knew was going to be explosive because we covered his divorce from Ivana. We talked about how his real estate dealings were far less, doing less well than he pretended. And we did use this information that he had the Hitler speeches on his desk. Some months later, Marie Brenner was at a dinner party, a big benefit in New York. And she's sitting there having dinner in her ball gown or whatever the hell she's wearing, and she suddenly feels like this cold something down her back.
I like the move, by the way, yes.
Well, it's what it was like, right? It's like, what's going on here? And she turns around thinking the waiter spilled some water, and she sees the figure of Donald Trump, like, sneaking off across the room because he just emptied a glass of white wine, at least it was white, down the back of her dress.
By the way, do you know what all these yellow, pink, and green notes are?
What are they?
Donald Trump. Now, as we're taping, the so-called odious, to use your word, about someone else, fake news awards are apparently happening today. But I don't know if you saw this. The day started with Senator Flake, the retiring senator from Arizona, making this pretty tough speech on the floor of the United States Senate. Here's Flake.
If we compromise the truth for the sake of our politics, we are lost. The enemy of the people was how the President of the United States called the free press in 2017. It is a testament to the condition of our democracy that our own president uses words infamously spoken by Joseph Stalin to describe his enemies.
Does his relentless assault on the media, this is a guy who craved media attention, you know this better than anybody else, does this worry you about the impact this has?
It worries me enormously. There was also an excellent piece by John McCain today, actually,
yes, there was indeed.
Post, it's terrific. These two senators have done this, although they're both retiring. So, well,
McCain is not... We don't know what.
Well, we don't
McCain,
know, but he's not well.
He's not well.
I'm deeply worried by it because I think it gives cover and it gives encouragement to all of the strongmen, on which there are so many, who use the press to simply shut it down, and who totally marginalize journalists, and they do it in order that they won't be criticized or they won't be exposed. It's very, very dangerous, and usually America was seen as the beacon of the free press, and it was this kind of wonderful, glowing thing that people could point to.
Do you ever, when you hearken back to these moments, when you were writing this book, and I know that when you were writing this book, do you see seeds of President Donald Trump in citizen Donald Trump?
Well, it's interesting. Funnily enough, in Vanity Fair, we used to do those celebrations of various celebrities in the Hall of Fame, right? We call it the Hall of Fame. We'd photograph them, and then we'd do a caption, because he, because he, because he. And interestingly enough, the one we did on Trump in '88 said, because he thinks he can negotiate arms control with the Russians, which I thought was interesting. It showed that we were already sensing that there were political ambitions here. And I think that, frankly, the Hitler speeches was, let's face it, a clue to who he admired.
You know, getting back to Quentin Tarantino, who said, I knew enough to do more than I did you know enough to do more than you did? Harvey Weinstein was your business partner. After you left Vanity Fair, you go to the New Yorker, I would argue the best job in the world. I can't imagine a better one. But you chose to leave there, Talk Magazine, a joint venture, I think it's fair to call, you and Harvey Weinstein. Did you know enough to do more than you did?
It's also fair to say it wasn't the best career move I ever made.
That's probably true.
Either. Absolutely not. No, because the thing about Harvey is that there was Jekyll and Hyde, right? I mean, what actually made Harvey interesting was the sort of dissonance between his work and this appalling monster that he really was. Now, you see...
But you don't mean sexual monster when you say monster.
No, but you know, I did see the monster pretty fast after he'd signed me. Before he signs me, it's just fabulous. Everything, just, you know, the great work, the wonderful charm. As soon as you go to work for him, you discover that he is a liar, a cheat, you know, an absolute sort of thug, quite frankly. But I didn't see the sexual stuff because, you know, frankly, this, you know, what he wanted was 23-year-old Italian starlets. And also, you know, I had my own power base as a member of the press, so he wasn't going to mess with that. So I was absolutely aghast, as everybody was, by the unbelievable stories of...
Do you find it hard to believe? And Meryl Streep, who I greatly admire, fellow New Yorker, I mean, has been criticized by some for suggesting she didn't know anything. Do you find it credible to believe that the Meryl Streeps of the world, those who have worked with him in more current times, knew virtually nothing?
I really don't believe that anybody... really, except his total inner circle, like his brother and so forth, understood quite what the hell was going on with Harvey Weinstein in those hotel suites. No, I don't. I mean, there's no reason really why Meryl Streep should, any more than there was I was. I mean, you know, let's face it, we've read about how he hired former Mossad agents to shut it down. And one of the things that I found tremendously working with Harvey was his obsession with press. You know, either getting good press or shutting it down. And he shut down every bad story that you could possibly hear.
Sounds like Donald Trump. You know, you mentioned...
Very similar, very Trumpian.
You just said you were not a 20-something, which is what he was looking for, but you were a 20-something. Were you 29?
Yes, I was 29 when I first came into Vanity
Fair. Yeah,
Fair.
I lived in New York City when you were there, and I sort of did. I also saw you on the street once. I didn't have the courage to come up and say hello. Once you became famous, you were not famous when you were 29, at least not in New York City. You were 29 years old, a kid. You were expected to be a turnaround artist at a magazine that was not doing terribly well, and probably most importantly, you were a woman in an industry that was not very woman-friendly. What was that like?
You know, it was a hugely combative situation, but I think that when you're young, you know, you're kind of reckless and you're full of confidence, right? I turned around a magazine in London. It was a small magazine, but it gave me confidence. I arrived here. I had a passion for what I was doing, you know, and I just wanted to just be parachuted into that thing, and I just had this vision, and I tore the magazine apart, and I, you know, ransacked the drawers in the office for the great photographs. I redesigned it. I hired everybody I knew, and I went in there at warp speed, which you really, you know, it's what you need to do when you're in your late 20s, right?
But you're expressing this colossal confidence, which is what I saw from afar. I mean, I didn't know you till a few minutes ago. But didn't I read somewhere in the book or somewhere that for the 8 years that you were there, for the vast majority, despite the wild popularity of the magazine, you didn't get a raise for most of that? Isn't that true?
It is absolutely true.
So what does that say about you or them or being a woman or something?
Well, there was a kind of wonderful moment where I am so grateful to get a $14,000 raise after I turned around the magazine from losing $50 million to making it, you know.
Because you wouldn't ask? Because you didn't...
I think that, I have to say, I think women are often way too reticent about asking for that. I didn't feel confident enough about what would happen if I did. So, but, you know, at a certain moment when I realized that I got another offer, is the truth, a big offer that, you know, I realized this was leverage, right? So I went...
From whom?
From Hearst, who wanted me to go and edit Bazaar. And I thought, you know what, it was a great magazine. I could leave. You've got to, if you use leverage, you have to be willing to leave. But I actually had... Mort Jankler, who was said to be a super agent, and I said I wanted him to take over the situation and intervene with me and Condé Nast. And he went to Cy Newhouse, the owner, and he's the one who said, you have to pay her more. And I got a huge, stocking great raise, which I would never have had the courage to ask for myself.
You know, when I'm reading this, you know, one part of me, when you have Henry Kissinger sitting on your right at some dinner party and Barbara Walters, it may be confusing dinner parties, whatever it is, well, I am so jealous. But then on the other hand, I step back and say, I think Peggy Lee, is that all there is? Was there not a point at which this got really old?
Yeah, it did. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to leave to go to the New Yorker actually was that I was tired of the kind of celebrity culture and the glitz.
You helped create it, though, didn't you? I know you. I've read you say Ronald Reagan's election really created it, but I think it's fair, either too modest or something, to suggest that Vanity Fair, you didn't help at least foster that culture.
Oh, no, we did. I mean, the Vanity Fair was a title that was about glamour and upscale life, right? It's not a magazine that was about, the metro section of the New York Times. But what I was able to do, I felt, with Vanity Fair was to create a package that was a gleaming and glamorous package. But inside of it, we did very good, gritty journalism.
Oh, yes, you did.
We did strong foreign reporting. We did strong crime stories, strong political stories. That was the fun of it. My sort of motto, if you like, is seduction, right? An editor has to seduce readers into reading everything in the magazine. Good, bad, hard, challenging, fun, or whatever. You use that glamour packaging to basically seduce the reader in. Once they're there, then you can do the incredible story about, Depression by William Styron, or the fall of Baby Doc in Haiti, and all the things that we did.
Or the most fabulous photographs I've ever seen in a magazine. By the way, I was one of the seducees, I should say. We only have 30 seconds left. You're training women. What are you doing there?
I have, about 8 years ago, I founded a convening of women called the Women in the World Summit.
So what are you doing?
It is really live journalism. What we do is we put together incredible women who tell amazing stories from all over the world about their lives. And a bit like with Vanity Fair, the story seduces people in. They're listening to this incredible story, but at the same time, they're also learning what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Africa, what is happening in Russia. And it's a very, very powerful journalistic, convening.
Tina Brown, it's great to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
The book, again, is The Vanity Fair Diaries. It is a truly fun read.